Welcome to the Butterfly Tumblr Radio channel. Are you ready to start today's story? Let's get started. On the edge of the ruthless workplace and the brink of morality, a drama about loyalty and betrayal is unfolding. A programmer's desperate request leads to an unbelievable deal. Where are the boundaries of human nature when money, power, and desire are intertwined? Follow me to uncover the mystery of this story. My boss waved me to a chair in front of his desk, and with a relaxed smile on his handsome face, invited me. "You don't often ask to meet with me, Alex, so this is an unexpected pleasure. How can I help?" It was perhaps the most important moment of my life. Taking a deep breath, I stated my request. I urgently need a salary increase. Salaries have been frozen for 3 years, and during this time, everything has become more expensive, especially gasoline and energy. Only electronics have become cheaper, and I don't need that. Before I even finished speaking, Richard was already slowly shaking his head. "I was expecting you. All 3 other department heads have already made the same request to me, although one was asking for his employees and not for himself. Sorry, Alex, but I'm afraid I'll have to give you the same answer I gave them. This is impossible. But I think my case is special. If you listen to my situation, you will see that too," I insisted, feeling panic rising within me. "Alex, over the last 3 years, while we haven't replaced natural turnover, we haven't had any forced layoffs, and the company wants to keep it that way. It's a simple equation: more money for someone means layoffs for others. You want to get someone fired. For 40 years, housing prices have risen steadily, as have wages. This meant that couples could overspend on a property, knowing that within 3 to 4 years, a salary increase would reduce mortgage costs to manageable amounts. My misfortune was that I bought the house shortly before this favorable period suddenly ended. I'm really desperate, Dom," I told him. "If I don't start earning more, I'll lose everything. I haven't paid my mortgage in 2 months, and if I'm late again, I'll lose my house. What makes it worse is that I'm now in huge negative equity, about £40,000. The house named the amount so accurately that I immediately became wary and, leaving the role of the beggar, sharply asked, "Are you investigating my case? I don't see how you could know the deficit so accurately." My boss was not taken aback by my change of tone, smiling charmingly as he explained, "Just an inspired guess, Alex. I know what houses in the area were selling for when you bought yours, and I know what they are going for now. So, depending on what kind of deal you concluded, your loss should be somewhere between £30,000 and £50,000. For a moment, I considered apologizing for my outburst, but instead decided to stand my ground, saying, "You see how desperate I am. I won't be able to pay my mortgage for the next 3 months, and then I'll be in real trouble. I need some help, Dom." Richard was silent for a while, looking at me thoughtfully, and when he finally spoke, his answer surprised me. "Does your lovely wife Emily not work?" I shook my head. "With 2 children under 5, she has little chance, not even part-time. Emily tried to find a job, but all we have in the area is cleaning or working in a store, and it doesn't pay much more than we would have to pay for a nanny. Any job has to be within walking distance because we were forced to give up her car over a year ago." "This is the root of your problem," my employer advised, stating the obvious. "In the current economic climate, very few people can support a family on one income." "I understand perfectly well what the problem is," I said calmly. "I don't know how to get out of this situation, so I had to come to you as a last resort." Richard thought again for a long time before saying, "I may have a solution, but you won't like it. I doubt you'll agree." His words sounded like a bright beacon cutting through the cloudy sky. Interrupting him, I assured him, "No matter what, I will do everything to get out of this mess." Something flashed in my employer's eyes as he warned, "Don't be so sure. What I'm about to say is for discussion, and nothing we say today will be binding on either side." Yes, I prodded him, eager to know what solution he had that could magically solve my financial problems. "For the past 2 years, I have had the right to hire a personal assistant, but I have not yet taken advantage of this opportunity, mainly because I did not want to create additional burden on the company during these difficult times. My idea is that your wife could work for me," he explained slowly. When I talked to her last Christmas, I realized that she used to work in HR, so she should have all the necessary skills. That would be great, I began to enthuse, but Dom raised his hand to stop me. You shouldn't rejoice ahead of time until you know all the conditions, he warned. When I say personal assistant, the emphasis is on personal. As you know, on the last weekend of every month, I travel abroad, and I expect her to accompany me, and we will probably be very close in these moments. It took me a moment to realize what he was talking about, and then anger filled my head. Are you saying that as part of this deal, you expect to sleep with my wife? I screamed. The house remained unperturbed in front of my heated face. Effectively, that's the deal, he said, but I wouldn't put it so harshly. So, how would you say it? When we are away, there may be situations where Emily and I are forced to share a room. This is what is called plausible deniability. Depending on what is needed for your peace of mind, you may choose to believe that such cases will never happen. But are you really going to take every opportunity to have sex with her? I asked coldly. Dom smiled. I said it's not really a fair answer to that question. You have to think what you want. Through clenched teeth, I told him my thoughts do not matter in this situation because I reject your kind offer outright. My boss seemed completely unfazed by my angry response, saying, "It's a shame because I think we could both benefit greatly from such a deal. Although I understand why you would feel obligated to refuse." We sat in silence, looking at each other as if we both knew there was more to say. When he didn't seem inclined to start the conversation first, I said, "We've gotten along well over the past 8 years. I considered you almost a friend and thought you felt the same way about me. I don't understand why, if this personal assistant job was available, you didn't help me by offering her to Emily without the conditions of sex." "What you say is very true," Dom said friendly, "but the simple fact is that I would not have achieved what I have in this world if I looked a gift horse in the mouth. Adding to that, the fact that I have never desired a woman as much as I desire your wife. She is truly exceptional, and you are a very lucky person. Do you have no conscience at all?" I asked sarcastically. "Of course, I have," said Dom smugly. "I consider myself a pretty decent guy, but in this case, the remorse was completely drowned out by thoughts of the pleasure I hoped to receive." "You can put in your proposal," I told him sharply. My boss took the rejection philosophically, saying, "I didn't expect a different answer, but I had to try." As he spoke, Dom stood up and walked to the door, and I followed him. At the door, he held out his hand and said, "I hope this won't negatively impact our working relationship." I wanted to punch him in the nose, but instead, I shook his outstretched hand. I quickly grabbed the doorknob, eager to leave the scene of my human humiliation, but before I could turn it, Dom beat me to it, saying, "You never know, you might change your mind after talking to your lovely wife. You know what? Take the rest of the week off. This should give you enough time to discuss the pros and cons. The offer remains valid until Saturday. If Emily wants the job, she should meet me for dinner at the Peacock Hotel at 8 o'clock sharp. We'll have a quiet dinner, and then I'll take her to the room I've booked for a formal interview. I have always been inclined towards mathematics and logic, so it was natural for me to choose a career as a programmer and systems analyst. I progressed quickly and 6 years ago took up my current position as head of computer technology, moving to a different area to do so. The downside is that I now mostly do admin with little opportunity to do the kind of smart coding that used to give me so much pleasure. I am 34 years old, my wife Emily is 2 years younger. Most men think their wives are beautiful, but I can objectively say that mine really is. She's a little too plump to be a classic model, and her exceptional beauty probably excludes her from the media, so she's chosen a profession that relies more on brains than beauty. We both worked for my previous employer in different departments but interacted frequently on a project I was working on. She was so out of my league that I had no pretensions, and I was more than happy to form a platonic relationship with her. But luckily, the fact that I wasn't a threat somehow attracted her. She later told me that she found my company relaxing compared to other men, and she was the one who first made it clear that she wouldn't mind if I asked her out for a drink. We never discussed our previous relationships, but I always assumed that her early experiences were about the same as my average successes. From the moment of our wedding to the beginning of the events described here, we lived 8 very happy years. I should also describe my immediate superior, Richard. I consider myself quite tall at 6 feet, but he is at least 3 inches taller. He is also larger than me and has more sporting hobbies. His main 2 leisure activities being squash and golf. His other strengths are that he is handsome, confident, and I begrudgingly admit it, charismatic. From the very beginning, I admired his relaxed style and thought we had a friendly working relationship. When I arrived home, I found Emily waiting impatiently for me. "He can't give me a raise, but he has offered you a job as his personal assistant," I told her, which made her face light up with joy. "Don't get excited too early because it's not that easy, and you can't accept this offer. For starters, he goes abroad for a couple of days every month, and he'll expect you to accompany him." The smile remained on my wife's face, better and better. "I've always dreamed of traveling." "You'll be sharing a room, he expects you to sleep with him while you're away." "Let him wait as long as he wants, but he won't get anything from me," Emily said firmly, the smile still not leaving her face. "You don't understand," I said desperately. "Sex is part of the deal. If you don't agree, there will be no work." I didn't know how I thought my wife would react, but I certainly didn't expect her to laugh. "Slippery, sneaky bastard," she said. "He has definitely fallen in my eyes." I agreed. I might have expected something like this. Emily said thoughtfully at the company Christmas party last year, "He couldn't take his eyes off my cleavage." What do you think? At least Dom is an attractive man, not short, fat, and bald like Mr. Kai Suden, the last boss I worked for. Although he hasn't proposed to me, I know he would like to. I couldn't help but feel that my wife wasn't taking this seriously, so I made my point firmly, telling her, "I think it's out of the question." "What do you think?" I agreed. "In fact, it's so absurd it's not even worth discussing," Emily said happily, adding, "We'll just have to solve our financial problems somehow differently." We spontaneously jumped to our feet to hug each other and enjoy a long hug, from there in agreement. We quickly headed to the bedroom for a rare night of passion. Over the past year, mounting financial worries had weakened our libido significantly. We still had sex, but it was more about bonding to satisfy a need rather than having sex just for pleasure, as we did a lot in our early years. I'm not sure what inspired us, but it was definitely a night to remember. And as Emily lay there afterwards, she gently whispered to me, "I never want to have sex with another man, but you." It felt weird being home the next morning when it wasn't a weekend or a holiday. I found something to do, mostly entertaining the kids, but it wasn't until they had settled down around 11 a.m. that Emily and I had time to sit down with a cup of coffee. I had barely taken my first sip when my wife said, "I don't know if you've thought about what we were talking about yet, but I have, and I know we're in a terrible mess. I haven't been too worried so far because I was pretty confident that your boss would be able to help us out. In the worst case, I didn't really think about it. I just deliberately excluded the topic from my thoughts. I've added up all our expenses for the next few months, and even without unexpected bills, there's no way we'll be able to pay off our mortgage in June. It may take a few months before they evict us, but we'll end up on the streets if we don't find some way out. I hope you're not thinking of accepting Dom's offer," I asked incredulously, ignoring my question. Emily continued, "If we lose our house, nothing will be the same. Paying off our apartment debt means we'll have to live in a rented place for years. It will undoubtedly be a much smaller apartment than we have here and in a much worse area. We will survive," I told her, not believing my words. "We need to look at this from all angles and not see it as the only problem," my sensible wife insisted. "It's not just about us. We have to think about the children and the schools they will go to. I think they can be very bullied at a school in a poor area. It's scary to even think about." I agreed rather senselessly. "I'll do anything to get out of this mess. I can't stand the thought of losing everything." "Are you offering to accept the offer?" "Of course not. I'm just saying that I'll take any job if it makes us money." "That's a relief," I said, forcing a smile. "Still, It's a very tempting offer if it weren't for the sex thing. It would be ideal. Then perhaps we should discuss this seriously, Emily replied, surprising me. The next morning, I called Dom and asked for an appointment. He said to come immediately. He met me at the door, shook hands, and invited me to sit down, saying, "This is a very pleasant surprise. I didn't expect you so soon." To avoid confusion, I quickly explained, "I'm not here to accept your offer. I just want to clarify some details, such as my wife's salary and how many hours a week will she work." It was obvious that my boss was well prepared. Taking a piece of paper, he said, "About 2/3 of what you get. That's the highest rate for this position because I'm sure it's worth it. Emily doesn't want to work more than part-time, which is a full salary." A smile of triumph appeared on Dom's face, and I realized that he thought he had played the trump card. How about a full salary for actually working part-time? I don't understand. When your wife travels with me, she receives a salary from the moment she leaves home until she returns. Usually, my trips last 2 days, sometimes 1, very rarely 3. For example, let's call it 48 hours a week. Of 35 hours, it's 140 hours in a month. Subtract 48, divide by 4, and you will see that she will only need to spend 23 hours a week in the office, which is less than 5 hours a day. Your beautiful wife will be able to take the children to school in the morning and be home to pick them up in the evening. That won't work, I answered honestly. Like I said, Emily doesn't have her own car anymore, so she'll have to ride with me. No problem. There's a company car that doesn't get used much, so she might as well use that car until she can buy her own, Dom said smugly. I didn't have anything to answer. My wife's boss effectively pulled the rug out from under my feet. After a minute of silence, he pushed, "Are there any other details you'd like to clarify?" We both knew what he was implying, but I just shook my head. At the door, he shook my hand again but stopped to say, "Tell Emily that if she comes on Saturday, I will introduce her to the pleasures of Monte Carlo." At the end of the month, at home, I conveyed the new information. I wondered how Emily would take the news about Monte Carlo because it was one of the places she wanted to visit. I must admit that after Dom's explanation, I was inclined to consider the offer more seriously, so I ended my words, "This is a very attractive offer if it were not for the sex matter. It would be ideal." I thought the offer was attractive enough to warrant discussing more seriously than we had previously, so I was surprised when she said, "I don't like it. I was hoping for a real job, but from what you just said, it's more like payment for sex, which makes me a little better than a woman of easy virtue." I was stunned and didn't know what to say, which gave my wife the opportunity to continue with a hint of anger in her voice, "And that will make you a salesman. How do you feel about that? When I'm away at the end of every month, and you will be sitting here alone, what do you think will be going through your mind, knowing that I'm lying on my back somewhere with Dom? For your information, I'm pretty sure he's bigger than you." "I think I could get used to it," I replied, explaining a few years ago I was chatting online with a guy who claimed his wife was a prostitute. He said she only worked 3 nights a week but still made more than both of them doing a regular job. I asked him how he felt when she worked, and he said it didn't bother him. He admitted that it was awkward the first few times but then it became indistinguishable from any other work, and what she did had nothing to do with their personal sex life. From other things he said, I realized that it was all about the attitude. "If you have any ideas about me doing the same, you can forget about it right now," Emily said sharply, but I was relieved to see the smile on her face. Nothing more was said that day, but we didn't make love that night. The next day, Emily brought up the topic again, saying, "I thought it was stupid to lose the house without a fight. We've both had sexual experiences with other people before we met, so if it's not cheating, what's the difference if I sleep with Dom? On the one hand, this seems like a small sacrifice compared to the benefits." I found myself changing my position too. "I'm not sure I can keep working for Dom, knowing he sleeps with you every month. I don't think I can stand his smug grin. What if he brags about his conquest or someone figures out what's going on?" "You are not logical," my wife said. "Given his position, Dom has more at stake than us, so he will definitely be discreet, and as for other people, they have no way of knowing because the sex will take place in other countries. You might feel a little awkward working with him, but if I can tolerate his harassment every month, then you can easily handle it. Are you proposing to do this? I asked, uncertainty. Emily took a deep breath before saying, I've decided that I'm willing to make this sacrifice, so it's up to you whether we accept it or not. That night, we had sex longer than usual, and instead of turning over, we stayed cuddled. It rather upset me because I had a deep feeling that it was symbolic. Emily fell asleep immediately, and I spent most of the night awake, thinking about the future. It was almost certain that I would agree to have my wife work for Dom, but I still desperately hoped that I could find some alternative. On Friday, we continued to pretend that we were living a normal life, doing various homework and even discussing trivial matters, but we were both careful not to touch the very large elephant in the room. It was the middle of the day, right after we made coffee. I couldn't stand it, and at the last moment, I tried to change the direction we were inexorably heading towards. Blurting out the fact that we both had sex with others in the past has absolutely nothing to do with our current situation. Since we met, we have both remained completely faithful to each other, as far as I know, but if you have sex with my boss, that exclusivity will be lost, and that's quite a valuable thing. Once you lose it, you can't bring her back. She's gone forever. Emily took no time to formulate her answer. Taking my hand and looking straight into my eyes, she said softly, Honey, I don't want to lose exclusivity, and I don't want to lose the house, but if one of them has to go, for me, it has to be exclusivity. Anyway, I knew this was the moment, but I couldn't speak until Emily nudged me. Well, what do you say? Should I go to the Peacock on Saturday or not? I guess so, I conceded. As soon as we got into bed, I was desperately looking for physical connection, but as soon as I got close to her, my wife pushed me away for the first time in a long time, saying, You can hug me, but nothing more, please. I'm not in the mood for sex right now because I'm not looking forward to what I have to do tomorrow. I hope you understand. I understood, but it didn't help, and I spent another mostly sleepless night. On Saturday morning, I took the children to my parents' where they stayed until Sunday afternoon. Returning home, we again continued to pretend that nothing was happening, although we both could not help but notice how time was dragging on into the evening as a sign of tension. I noticed that Emily looked at her watch almost as often as I did. The final countdown began in the late afternoon when she suddenly stood up and said, I guess it's time to start getting ready. What are you going to wear? I felt obliged to ask. I'm not sure yet, but I'm definitely not going to dress up for that bastard, Emily said firmly. My wife took a very long bath, then spent over an hour in the bedroom. When she finally appeared, she stood hesitantly in the doorway. She might not have dressed up, but she certainly didn't look sloppy. She looked absolutely adorable, but I didn't think it was the right time to compliment her looks. We only had time for a quick cup of tea, and off we went. Emily suggested that I drop her off at the Peacock and then come back for her after she texted, but I insisted on waiting for her in the parking lot. When we were almost there, I heard myself asking, what do you think Dom would want her to do? I have absolutely no idea, but he definitely won't get anything special that I do just with you, Emily assured me. But he will probably be expecting something. At this point, we were already in the parking lot. Having stopped the car, I ran to her side, and we stood face to face. My heart was beating like a drum, and it was difficult for me to breathe. I leaned in to kiss her, but Emily held out her cheek instead of her lips so as not to ruin her lipstick. Good luck, I muttered, later realizing how pointless that was. Emily also tried to remain brave. Who knows, I might even like it, she said with a smile and then headed towards the hotel entrance. The first hour of waiting wasn't that bad, or rather the first hour and 20 minutes because I knew Emily was safe in the restaurant. At first, I couldn't believe that I was actually sitting here and agreeing to what would happen later. It seemed unreal. Strangely, this tension soon passed as different things caught my attention, and incredibly, there were times when I almost forgot why I was there. But then I received a simple message, my work, I'm going to his room in a minute. Love, T. And from that moment, everything changed. I looked at the windows on the upper floors, trying to guess which one had his room. After 5 minutes, a light came on in one window, and I assumed that this must be it. But after I looked around the building for other lights that were on, I forgot which window it was. My right knee began to shake spasmodically with increasing force until at one point the movement of my leg became so violent that I had to get out of the car and walk in slow circles around it until it subsided. I was so absorbed in the agonizing thoughts of what was happening in that vague room that I almost jumped in surprise when the door suddenly opened, and Emily sat down in the passenger seat. "Go home, please," she said. It had only been about 20 minutes since I received the text message, which gave me hope that nothing had happened, but my wife's behavior suggested otherwise. I only had one question: did you have sex? Emily didn't answer, but after glancing sideways as I drove away, I was sure she shook her head. I felt relieved at first, but then anxiety set in, and I spent the rest of the ride trying to figure out whether her movement meant that sex wasn't happening or simply that she didn't want to talk about it. When I stopped the car at our house, Emily immediately started to get out of the car but stopped to instruct me, "After you put the car in the garage, put the kettle on, love, while I brush my teeth and wash my face." Still anxious, I waited until Emily returned and took a sip of tea before she looked at me and said, "Dom was a much more polite and entertaining person than I thought. He made me laugh several times, and 2/3 of the way through dinner, he didn't even start talking about work." In the end, I had to bring up the topic myself. "Don't worry, I got the job, and all the benefits and conditions remain the same. I start at the office on Tuesday, but on Monday, I go shopping for work clothes. I'll get a company card with a £500 credit, but I'll have to pay back everything I spent in my first 3 paychecks. What about after dinner?" I insisted, fearing that she might linger longer recounting their conversation in detail. He was a real gentleman in the restaurant, but now he seemed to think he could do anything, and the smug look on his face irritated me. I laughed. How did he react to this? "Much better than I expected," Emily said with a smile. "It actually made him stand out in my eyes when he said, 'Okay, at this point, I'm more than happy with whatever you're willing to give.' It's actually nice to know that I'm dealing with a woman of character." So, what is next? Even I myself heard the hoarseness in my voice. It was all pretty formal. What happened next? I left. I couldn't stand being in that room anymore. As I was leaving, Dom yelled, "See you Tuesday," but honestly, Alex, after tonight, I'm not sure I want to continue this. I didn't argue about it, and we didn't mention it again for the rest of the evening. But I was in for a surprise. I half expected Emily to give up sex for a while after her experiences in the Peacock, but quite the opposite happened. As soon as we got into bed, we made love. We slept late on Sunday morning, so late that I had to rush through dinner before I had to go get the kids. When I returned, I found her leafing through a women's clothing catalog, looking for ideas. "Look," she said, excitedly discussing how she planned to spend her clothing allowance. There was no further mention of the night before, and Emily returned from shopping on Monday with what she described as 3 skirt and jacket sets and a few other items. I was treated to a fashion show of her acquisitions. There were 3 skirt and jacket sets in black or charcoal, all fitted and with a skirt length falling just below mid-thigh. She looked businesslike, not hiding her sexuality. She also bought some very attractive blouses and what seemed like quite a lot of new underwear. Unfortunately, these delicate items were not included in her impromptu fashion show. I was late to work Tuesday morning, so I could take my wife to work, just as the babysitter arrived. I left her at the reception, and that was the last time I saw her before I returned home that night. I thought she might pop into my department to say hi, but then again, I wasn't looking for her either. That night, Emily suggested avoiding contact at work, saying, "I even think we shouldn't take lunch breaks at the same time. I do have a right to a break, but Dom says no one is watching. I think he expects me to always have lunch with him, so if you end up in the cafeteria at the same time, it could be quite awkward." When I got home, I couldn't park in my usual spot because Emily's company car was already there. It was a small 2-seater with low engine power and high mileage, but it made her independent of me for commuting. Throughout the evening, she spoke enthusiastically about her new career, saying how much she enjoyed using her mind again. I learned that her first business trip with my boss was scheduled in 10 days. I was relieved that she would only be gone one night, leaving early on Friday morning and returning late Saturday afternoon. I don't know if this was intentionally arranged to make it easier for both of us to adapt to the new routine. The plan was that she would go to Dom's in the morning, and they would head to the airport together. During the first week, I remained surprisingly calm about my wife's upcoming trip, perhaps distracted by her daily excited updates about her new job. Even my last day off was quite fun with lots of laughter, but that quickly changed as the new work week began. Usually, Monday is when you start looking forward to Friday and the next weekend, but I desperately wanted time to stand still. Every day, the tension in my head increased, while Emily seemed surprisingly calm, and this made me not express my feelings so as not to convey my anxiety to her. I survived Friday night surprisingly well and much better than I expected. I convinced myself, 24 hours ago, she was here, and in another 24, she will be back. By constantly repeating this mantra, I was able to isolate myself from the time in between. I also switched from regular wine to spirits, which definitely helped. My responsibility to my children prevented me from getting drunk, but I drank enough to create a pleasant feeling of brain fog. On Saturday afternoon, while playing on the floor with the children, Emily suddenly appeared, looking down at us. I don't know how I imagined she would look, but any guess would be far from the truth. There was a clear shine on her face, and it was obvious that everything inside her was boiling with suppressed excitement. Unfortunately for me, the kids immediately turned on her as if she had been gone for a month instead of just one day. My only clue was that she whispered, "You absolutely won't believe what I'm going to tell you." They had to wait until dinner and put the children to bed before the secret was revealed. Returning downstairs after kissing our children goodnight, Emily immediately went to her purse, took it out, and began scattering large bills of unknown currency on the floor. "I'm not sure about the exchange rate, but it's almost 5,000 euros, she said solemnly. "All our problems are solved." "Where did all this come from?" I asked rather stupidly. "I won it at roulette," Emily explained with a huge smile. "Pour us some wine to celebrate, dear, and I'll tell you everything from the beginning." I quickly took out our holiday glasses and filled them with red wine. Once we were comfortable, still smiling, my energetic wife began her story. As soon as we cleared customs in Monte Carlo, Dom asked if I had taken an evening dress, and when I said no, he immediately took me to a rather chic boutique and picked out a dress for me to wear. It was made of red silk, material reached to the ankles, but with a large slit on one side. The only thing I didn't really like was that it left too much of my breasts on display. I couldn't object much because he paid. "You'll get this dress later." "Tell me about the money," I hurried, actually worrying about what happened next. The casino was so luxurious, you wouldn't believe it, with all these elegantly dressed people. I could easily believe this was a James Bond film set. Dom put a stack of chips in front of me, as well as in front of himself. I didn't understand what to do, so I just put a chip on our house number, and couldn't believe my eyes when the ball landed on 33, and there was a huge pile of chips in front of me. That would have to be almost triple what you started with. I quickly calculated, and my wife nodded happily, and I kept winning. I didn't know any other lucky numbers, so I bet 3 or 4 chips every spin on red or black, even or odd, and on groups of numbers, and almost every time I got more chips. It was amazing. Some people started following my bets, and a large crowd of spectators gathered around the table. But in the end, I got tired of it. At first, I really liked being the center of attention, but then I felt stuffy and felt too much I was looking at my breasts, so I suggested that Dom go to the blackjack table. "Did your winnings continue?" I asked. Emily shook her head. "I made 6 or 7 bets and didn't win a single hand." Dom said that blackjack was clearly not my game and that it was stupid to give away all my winnings. He wanted to call a night. I don't know if he was really worried or just wanted to get me to our room. I think my luck would have changed again, but by that time, Dom only had 3 or 4 of his own chips left, so I agreed to end the game. When we cashed out the chips, I tried to give him all the money, but he said that these were my winnings. Instead, I tried to return the initial payment to him, but he refused and said that he expected me to lose and said goodbye to this money when he gave it to me. As soon as we had the opportunity to be alone, I kissed him as a token of gratitude. I had been pleasantly distracted by the story of her successful game, but now we were approaching the climax of her story, and I felt my excitement growing. "I'm sorry, Alex. I know I said I would hold back, but I didn't," she said quietly. I don't know if it was out of excitement or because I was so grateful for the money, but it seemed natural to me. I couldn't help myself. That effectively ended the conversation, and we soon went to bed. Some might have thought that I would like my wife back, but sex was the last thing on my mind because I was in the grip of a deep depression. The next day, my mood changed completely, no doubt thanks to Emily's happy cheer. She smiled and sang and practically skipped from room to room, but I wasn't able to tune into her wavelength until Monday after I paid off the mortgage and all the other outstanding bills. It was a wonderfully liberating feeling to no longer have the burden of debt drilling into my head. Normal sexual relations resumed, but they were far from normal, filled with even hotter passion than I remembered from the days of our honeymoon. This state of euphoria lasted for 3 whole weeks until we started counting down to Emily's next weekend. My tension gradually increased day by day, but I assumed that it was only my worries until on Wednesday evening, Emily suddenly blurted out, "You know, now it's more difficult for me than the first time. Although in theory, it should be easier." Then, I pulled us out of the hole, and I could feel good about it, but now the crisis is over, so I'm just fulfilling the obligation. Also, last time, after winning all this money, everything seemed like a dream to me, but this time, there are no distractions. I will spend 2 nights with him, not 1. We discussed this, including the benefits already achieved, and decided that we did the right thing. At the end of the conversation, we both felt much better, especially thanks to Emily, who reminded me, it's just sex. At the end of the conversation, she said, "Like last time, I doubt I'll be in the mood for sex tomorrow night, so if you want me, you better do it now." On Friday night, the kids gave me a hard time by refusing to go to bed because they were missing a goodnight kiss from their mother, leaving me physically tired and falling asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. Saturday night was different. My parents took the kids for the night, so I was left alone at home with nothing to do but think. I looked out the window as Emily parked her car in front of the house. I'm not saying she looked as cheerful as she did when she first returned, but she certainly looked very relaxed as she took her small suitcase out of the trunk and walked determinedly into the house. "We were in Paris, and it was wonderful," she told me over the heads of 2 small bodies clinging to her legs. Again, I had to wait until our kids were asleep before I could get the full report, but my wife gave me a piece of information before then, you won't believe it. On the second day, we went up to the Eiffel Tower to admire the view. She began, "At first, we were in an empty elevator, and Dom said he'd pick me up on the way up. I'm sure he was joking, but I'll never know because a lot of people rushed into the elevator at the last minute, so he couldn't." I was very relieved but maybe a little disappointed. I don't know where he got his impudence from. Emily seemed excited by the memories, but her story left me with a dull sense of unease. In the weeks leading up to the next time, we continued to enjoy more frequent sex along with increased passion, but I still faced our next separation with an even greater sense of dread because her destination was Rome, and she would be gone for 3 nights. In some ways, I could see that this made up for the single night of her first visit, but decided to complain if it happened again in the future. I have to mention one little mental quirk before this. My big problem was the loss of exclusivity, but looking back now, it seemed almost irrelevant. It was one of the truest laws of life: if you look forward to something, it will take forever to happen, but when you expect unpleasant experiences, the opposite happens. Before I knew it, Emily's next weekend was almost here. There was no conversation worth repeating, but what became significant later was that I didn't even try to have sex the night before she left. Those long weekends when my wife was away were a nightmare, during which I barely slept and constantly felt discomfort in my stomach. I instinctively felt that something had changed, but I could not understand what it was. Something definitely upset me. I suspected that Emily was looking forward to her absence this time, and later, that's when I began my interrogations. She seemed even less willing to answer questions. In fact, after just 2 questions, she suddenly said with irritation, "I don't understand why you need to know all these details. Honestly, I think it's a little perverted. I'm starting to think that you like to listen to what another man is doing to me." I was shocked by her words. My questions were an attempt to maintain some kind of control, and I had no idea that they could be interpreted as perverted. This sudden outburst ruined the mood, and we exchanged only a few words for the rest of the evening. On the Friday evening of the second week after her return, I came home to find a shiny red two-seater Subaru parked where my wife's much more battered car usually Saturday. Inside, I found Emily with a smile on her face. "How do you like my new car?" she asked expectantly. "Looks good, but I don't understand," I replied. "I've been with the company for exactly 3 months, and the car is a sign that I've passed the trial period. It's not brand new, but I like it. Dom gave me the afternoon off so I could drive around and get used to it. That was the first thing I learned about probation, but I let it go." Emily continued to rave about her new car. She said she always attracted the attention of other drivers, but with this new vehicle, it seemed like every man on the road wanted to ride alongside, waving or honking. With a smile, she said how good it felt to take off the gas and leave everyone behind. Something about her extreme happiness compared to my constant feeling of being twisted made me suspect that she was getting a lot of pleasure out of our life setup, and I said so. The smile disappeared from my wife's face in an instant. There was more irritation than anger in her voice as she told me, "I don't understand you. You were okay when I sold myself to save the house, and now you're starting to get nervous because you think I really need it. I really like it." The next day, still seething from my wife's remark, I had barely taken a seat in the dining room when I saw Dom heading towards me. He was alone, sitting down opposite me, and he cheerfully asked, "So, how do you like Emily's new car?" "Very good," I admitted reluctantly. "I got her a promotion," my boss boasted, seeming very pleased with himself. "She deserves it. She puts so much energy into everything she does and is always willing to learn." I had nothing to say because I wasn't sure if it was an honest assessment of her office abilities or an indirect reference to their sexual relationship. 2 weeks later, she returned from Prague, and upon her return, I was again treated to travel notes. Emily described the old town and square, noting that many of the buildings dated back to the 13th century. After she enthusiastically talked about her trips to back streets, looking for quaint little shops, I innocently remarked that she seemed to really enjoy it. She replied sharply, "Why not? It's quite natural. Dom is very attractive. He's a great lover. What did you expect?" I continued to focus on her month-long trips, but it's worth noting that in between, we lived a normal life with few mentions of her absence. The only difference from the time before all this began was that my wife seemed to have acquired a greatly enhanced libido, and she was now initiating sexual activity much more often than I was. I think I was just used to making the best of the advantages but turning a blind eye to what was happening when she left. The next major stage came towards the end of the month. I finished work a little early and actually followed Emily on the way home. At the front door, I playfully grabbed her for a homemade kiss, but to my surprise, she resisted. As she tried to open the door and go inside, I could smell the unmistakable scent of him on her. I waited until the boys were asleep before I simply said, "When you got home, I smelled it on you." I could tell by her eyes that she was expecting me to say something. I knew it was a mistake to do it during the day. "You don't deny it." "How can I?" My wife replied boldly, meeting my gaze. "That's where the Subaru came from. Dom offered to extend the agreement by upgrading my car if I would occasionally take care of him at work. Compared to what I do with him during our trips, this is nothing. I would tell you, but after you started worrying about other things, I didn't see the point in not upsetting you. I don't do this every day, but it definitely happens more than once. It's not always convenient because I actually have a real job. Until now, it has always been in the morning, but today, Dom was out of the office most of the day. I wasn't happy. This is beyond anything I agreed to." I could see from my wife's face that she was genuinely puzzled. "I don't see the harm in it. If he can do whatever he wants to me at the end of the month, what's the point of a no-contact rule for the rest of the time?" The quick answer to her question eluded me, and as I struggled to find the answer, Emily continued triumphantly, "I love doing it, and it's brought me a great car to drive. The house is happy, I'm happy, and you really have no reason to complain. What do I get out of this, honey? I asked. It's simple. I think I'm more sexually active now than ever, and you're definitely getting your share. I couldn't refute this, so I simply remained silent. Only on the eve of her next departure did we have another disagreement. I had been sick since the beginning of the week and wasn't in the mood for sex, but by Thursday evening, I was feeling better. However, when I tried to start, Emily pushed me away, saying, "I thought we agreed that you wouldn't touch me the night before I left." "I don't remember that arrangement," I said, displeased. "You were excited the first 2 times, but that's definitely not the case anymore." When I tried again, she resisted even more, saying, "If you really want to know, Dom prefers me to be clean when I'm with him." This news did little to improve my state of mind. My wife's destination that month was Amsterdam, but I don't remember much of what she said, except for their visit to Anne Frank's house. I didn't even ask about her extra sex. In some perverse way, the fact that she was servicing her boss for a month made my time while she was away easier, since it seemed to take away the special significance of her time abroad. As a result, I got through 2 days without thinking too much about what she might be doing at any given moment. The next month was completely different. From the moment I knew in advance that she was going to Rome again, I had a problem. Perhaps it was because it was the 6th time she had left, and thus some kind of anniversary. Perhaps it was the memory of that terrible 3-day absence. Or perhaps I instinctively felt that this place had special significance. Lying alone in bed while she was away, I was almost back to square one. Emily walked through the door Sunday afternoon with a big smile on her face, and even before I could kiss her, she told me she had 2 good news for me. She said, "Dom waited until they left to tell me the good news." The first news was that she had been given a surprise £1,000 bonus, and the second was that we could use a luxury villa for a week starting next weekend. The villa belonged to the company and was usually reserved for directors, but Dom noticed a free week and was somehow able to give it to us for our use. Of course, that night and the following days, we talked a lot about the upcoming vacation, and what she could do while she was away was never mentioned. It was a luxurious villa in every sense of the word, situated on a cliff top with panoramic sea views. The outdoor area was equipped with a small infinity pool and jacuzzi for 6 people. Inside was a large living room with several Roman sofas scattered around, each with an accompanying low table. In addition, there was a huge thin TV hanging on the wall. Both bedrooms were the same size, but one had a huge king-size bed, and the other had bunk beds and a fold-out crib. Although hampered by the excessive excitement of the children, we were still able to quickly unpack and put things in order. An hour later, while Emily and the boys were in the hot tub, I was trying to figure out the barbecue. Everything was fine except that I couldn't find the tools I needed, so I complained loudly about it in the kitchen cabinet to the right of the sink, on the second shelf. She shouted back without even thinking, "You really know this area well." I told her, "It must be, this is the 3rd time I've been here." My wife explained without showing any embarrassment, "Dom and I always come here when he has business in Rome. We spent last weekend here." With this statement, the vacation immediately deteriorated in my perception. I didn't say anything more, but after we ate and while my wife tended to the kids, I walked into the master bedroom and stared at that extremely large bed. My thoughts filled with lewd images of what I knew was about to happen to her the next morning. Still very depressed, I got up and went outside. I quickly discovered that behind our villa, there was another mirror copy of ours. I carefully tried to open the door, found it was unlocked, and went inside. The layout was identical, but the view was of the landscape rather than the sea, and it appeared that the external amenities were shared. While exploring the master bedroom, I noticed something shiny stuck in the thick pile of the carpet at the head of the bed, which upon closer inspection turned out to be a diamond earring. It belonged to Emily. I knew this because I bought her this expensive set for our 2nd wedding anniversary. After breakfast, still sitting at the table but with the boys playing on the side with their toys, I pushed the earring towards my wife and told her where I found it. She looked at it for a full minute without saying a word and then said, "I guess I should tell you, the last time I was here, there was Dom and another man." I of course wanted to know the details and was told that he was a client of the house, named Armand, a man of 50, very bald, and with the beginnings of a beer belly. That £1,000 was actually my commission for closing the deal. I had nothing to say. I just sat there looking at her in bewilderment, and I think disgust. This lack of response caused my wife to shrug and light-heartedly remark, "We still need every penny, don't we?" I knew from the beginning that the deal we made with Richard was open, but I think at least part of me believed that in 6 months or a year, when Emily's salary fixed our finances, she would quit her job, and we would get back to normal family life. Now I had to slowly come to terms with the fact that I would be sharing my wife's body with another man for the foreseeable future. Emily ended up in Berlin one of the next 2 months, but I forgot which. I consider this a quiet period during which I had a constant feeling of dissatisfaction with the way my marriage was going, but I was not extremely unhappy. There was also no noticeable talking. One day while she was busy packing for a new trip, I complained that her frequent absences were ruining our marriage, but she responded unsympathetically, "I don't see what you can complain about. You're having sex a lot more often than before I started sleeping with Dom." I couldn't argue with her about the sex because Emily seemed really eager to make love to me to death, but in our alone time, it seemed like there was more and more raw sex and less love. Another time when she was about to leave, confronted with her now obvious desire to be with her lover, I asked about his attractiveness. My wife's face literally lit up when she told me, "He's exciting. He makes me feel alive. Dom likes to take risks, like doing things to me in places where we could easily get caught. You like it, isn't it? It makes me feel very uncomfortable, but it's very difficult for me not to do what he wants." She said simply, "Anything, only within reason." This was the first time I thought that I might be better off leaving this marriage. One day in the middle of the month, Emily asked if I would mind if she went out with the girls from the office in the evening. I quickly gave my consent, and she returned home late but in a happy, cheerful mood. This happened 2 more times, but this time for some reason, I was very suspicious. After she left, I quickly called my parents, who immediately came for emergency child care, allowing me to leave in the car. I was not at all surprised to find my wife's distinctive car parked in front of Richard's house. I confronted Emily the moment she entered the house, but she was unrepentant, responding by shouting, "You don't like me sleeping with him at work, so I don't do it, but I can't go a month without being with him. You have no idea how much I want him. It's not love. I could never love him as much as I loved you because he's not really a very nice person, but there are times when I go crazy with him. I don't understand how this happens, but he has some strange power over me." I was shocked by her words, but even more shocked that she mentioned her love for me in the past tense. The next morning, I contacted a young, up-and-coming lawyer named Colin, a friend of a friend, and took the next day off to visit his office. Over the course of more than 2 hours, I told him everything I described above, which partly explains why I remember the details so well. I also had to answer many of his insightful questions. Once he had all the information he needed, Colin asked me what I wanted to achieve. I said I would seek a divorce, but more importantly, I wanted to see if there was a way to legally get to Richard. Colin smiled and said, "I know the perfect law, but you may be 50 years too late. This lawsuit is called alienation of affection, and is classified as a civil case. The problem is that it has been overturned in all but 5 American states. In the UK, I'm not sure, it's certainly outdated, but there's a good chance it's still in place. The beauty of this law is that in the case of employees, you can also sue the employer for allowing this to happen. It almost sounds too good to be true. What's the catch?" "You have no proof," Colin said, trying but failing to suppress a smile. "What about everything I just told you?" I asked, completely devastated. He may deny it, claiming that he fell in love or that the attraction was irresistible. "You need to prove that your boss cold-bloodedly engineered a campaign to steal your previously loving wife from you. If you can get him to admit it on tape, you win. To succeed in this case, your wife must leave the house, preferably to live with him, and you must also show that it was a happy marriage before all this. Try to avoid talking about that stupid agreement, and if they mention it in court, we deny it. I doubt they will be believed." At the end of our meeting, Colin sent me to another office in the same building, where I met with a retired police officer who, as I was told, was entrusted with all investigative work. After I described my needs, he quickly and efficiently equipped me with what he called 8-wire, a recording device with a miniature microphone attached to my chest. In fact, to be sure, I left his office with 2 of these devices. It didn't take much practice before I, full of confidence, called Dom and asked to meet back in my boss's office. As I sat in the chair once again, playing the role of the beggar, I couldn't help but think about the previous time I sat in the same position. "How can I help you this time?" Richard asked with the same confident manner. "I want you to stop having sex with my wife," I said quietly. He laughed contemptuously. "No way. In fact, you are lucky that she still lives with you. All I have to do is snap my fingers, and she will come running. In fact, if it weren't for your children, she would already be with me. You lost her to a better man, Alex, and you should get over it." "I don't understand how this happened," I mumbled, and that was enough to send Dom on a sort of ego trip, in which he boasted of his cunning and irresistible seduction techniques. His words could not have suited my purposes better if I had written them myself. "It happened because I made it happen," Richard said smugly. "I liked her at first sight. Any man would, but it wasn't until last Christmas that I realized she was susceptible to temptation. The problem was that I didn't know how to use this information until I came up with the idea of offering her a job. It was brilliant, if I may say so myself. From then on, everything was easy, but I was in no hurry. I acted step by step. Taking her abroad was the key because I had many opportunities to get into her mind, and soon she became like wax in my hands. This woman is a sexual volcano, and you didn't know it. I'd bet good money that you never realized how submissive she is." I shook my head, apparently hopelessly, and this provoked him to further triumphant ridicule. "Another thing I found hard to believe was how long were you with her? It took me less than 3 months to reach this milestone. I thought we were friends, maybe there were, but you know what they say, all's fair in love and war. At first, it was just for sex, but after I tried it, I decided that I wanted her for myself, and from that moment on, Alex, you were doomed. A woman like Emily needs a real man, and unfortunately, you are. You're a pretty decent guy and good at your job, but in bed, I'm guessing you must be a little clumsy." Despite the need to gather evidence, I jumped to my feet, unable to bear his disdain, but Dom almost raced me to the door. Once there, he extended his hand, saying, "No offense, but you have to admit that the better man won." I refused to shake his hand, filled with delight at the ease with which I had accomplished my mission. I left work and hastened to hand over my spoils to Colin. He was delighted, declaring that the words of the house unconsciously, what he said, is more than enough to win our case. He said he would transcribe the recordings and include copies in the lawsuits against Richard and the company's headquarters. Before I left, he repeated that he would take no action until I informed him that my wife had left the family home. I returned home filled with sadness, knowing that I was almost certainly going to end my marriage. I waited until there were no distractions and then, without preamble, I told Emily that I could no longer tolerate her cheating. I said that what she did in the office was cheating, but I ignored it. However, I was not going to tolerate her lies just to steal a few extra hours with the man who was now clearly her lover. "You're just stupid," Emily said lightly. "What's the harm in that? If you don't understand this, then I can't explain it to you." I said quietly, "Okay, if it's that important to you, I'll stay home, but I might start seeing him at work again. I have my own needs." Emily said, annoyed, "That's not enough and more. I want you to stop seeing him completely. In fact, I want you to quit tomorrow so you have no contact with Dom. I'm tired of sharing you with another man, especially now that we are no longer in a desperate situation. It's not about the money. I love my job, and I love having sex with Dom, and I love having sex with you, but Dom can give me pleasures that you never can," Emily replied sharply. "Are you saying you love him?" I asked. "It may not be true love, but I'm fascinated, and I miss him sometimes," Emily admitted. "Then I want a divorce," I told her. I thought my statement would act like a nuclear strike, but it turned out to be more like wet fireworks. Emily looked at me carefully and then said quietly, "It's actually a bit of a relief. Dom has been insisting that I leave you for the last couple of months, and I was tempted, but I'm still very attached to you and didn't want to hurt you like that. I will seek custody of the boys, but I won't stop you from seeing them. You can come anytime as long as you come alone." I told her in a more peaceful tone, "My soon-to-be ex-wife, I've found a special connection with our nanny, Sue." As her footsteps disappeared from view, I felt a slight sense of guilt for not warning her about the approaching storm. My first task at work the next day was to call Colin to tell him to get going. When I returned home the next day after work, the nanny told me that my wife was there, picking up things from the house. Looking around, I found that almost nothing was missing from its place, but in the bedroom, checking the closet on Emily's side, I was confronted with a row of empty hangers. At that moment, with a feeling of sadness, I accepted for the first time that our relationship was truly over. 2 days later, I had barely walked into my office in the morning when the door swung open, and Richard burst in with his crimson face and bulging eyes. He seemed on the verge of apoplexy, and almost in slow motion, I could see drops of saliva flying from his mouth. "You damn bastard, what the hell is this alienation of affection lawsuit?" he shouted, waving the document in the air as he crossed the office to stand in front of me. He waved his fist in front of my nose and hissed angrily, "I could crush you," even though he seemed to tower over me at that moment. I stood still and calmly replied, "You won't risk it." "What's the risk?" "I could put you on your shoulder blades with one hand. You will limit yourself to breaking my nose, but if I manage to gain the upper hand, I will kill you," I said. I think it was my voice, not my words, that confused him, but Dom quickly backed down, muttering something along the lines of, "Don't get your hands dirty." Apparently having nothing more to say, he turned sharply and left the room, slamming the door. A couple of days later, I arrived at work later than usual because I was late getting the kids settled, but I had barely gotten into my office when my deputy showed up, asking if I knew what was going on. When I admitted ignorance, he explained that several people from the head office had arrived, and both Richard and Emily had to pack their things and leave with an escort. I pretended to be as puzzled as he was. The next morning, a letter was delivered to me by courier, printed on head office letterhead, which stated, "Dear Sir, in connection with the case of Richard and your wife, our lawyers have come to the opinion that the law you refer to is no longer valid. However, we are advised that by terminating the employment of these 2 employees as soon as possible, we have complied with all necessary obligations. On this basis, we intend to defend ourselves in court if you decide to proceed with the matter." I half expected to see Emily over the weekend, but it was Dom who came to my front door. So when the bell rang, I opened it, leaving the chain in place. Seeing my caution, he showed his empty hands, palms up, declaring that he meant no harm and just wanted to talk. Noting that he seemed rather depressed, I let him in. I offered him a drink as etiquette required, and as we sat down, feeling more confident than I actually felt, I asked, using his words, "How can I help?" "I don't have the £100,000 you are asking for," he said. "Hell, if I sold everything I have, it would be a lot less than half that amount, and there would be legal fees if I tried to defend myself. I'm here to ask you to be a little more reasonable. If I settle this out of court, and the company gave up so easily, I know I don't stand a chance." I made him wait, pretending to think, and then asked, "What do you think would be fair?" Dom shrugged his shoulders as a sign of impotence. "I don't know the amount you asked for." I guess I was a bit of a bastard. I gave him some more time to think, but his confession saved him some money when I said, "I think it's only fair that you pay the £20,000, which is Emily's share of my negative equity because I don't want it still hanging on her when you left her." "I'm not going to leave her," he quickly countered. "Maybe not in the near future, but I doubt you will live to old age together. I think Emily and I could have achieved this if you hadn't interfered, so I want £10,000 more for it. You will also pay my legal fees, but I don't think they are much at the moment." After I had laid out my terms, I paused for effect and then added, "This is my first and last offer, but the amount will increase if you try to drag it out." The relief on his face was palpable. "That's very generous." "I agree," he said. Strangely, after matters were settled, he seemed reluctant to leave and began a speech that amounted to an attempt to justify his actions. He finished by saying, "I was willing to spend money to win your wife, but I never imagined that she would be so expensive. I'll be in a worse financial situation than you were when this all started. Subaru will have to be sold first. Would you believe it? I paid for this damn car out of my own pocket. In 6 months, I applied for the house seat but obviously didn't get it. However, I kept my position and received a salary increase that ironically was almost exactly what I had hoped for last year. Emily calls often to see her children. I found that I couldn't hate her for losing control of my hormones, and we have an amicable relationship. I even left home for 2 weekends and 1 full week during which she moved in to spend time with the kids. Dom seems to be having a hard time with his relative poverty, and I get the impression that outside the bedroom, Emily is already beginning to become alienated from him. There is no prospect of us reuniting, not least because I have found a special connection with our nanny, Sue. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.